This content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained on here constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Draper Goren Holm or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments whatsoever. And you can catch the recording of this episode of Blockchain of Booze on our media partners channel, Blockchain Radio, and on Draper Goren Holm's YouTube channel. And without further ado, today's topic is all about the cannabis industry. And I think we're also going to dive into the psychedelic side of things with recent news and headlines of Oregon. What was it? Oregon allowing it? Josh, you're the lawyer here. What was the headline in Oregon?
And I see Lake Oswego's in the house here with Chad Martin also. So Oregon approved in this last election a rather sweeping legal change for a number of scheduled substances that effectively treats them as a medical issue as opposed to a criminal issue or tries to. The psilocybin mushrooms in particular, and I agree with this 1,000,000%, are viewed upon as a clinical treatment really for post-traumatic stress disorder and treatment-resistant depression. And there's, a wealth of lab, clinical evidence on that front that has been gathered over, decades really. So they're moving that way. California has announced an intent to go in that direction, or at least put it on the ballot. And of course, the Canadians are a little bit ahead of us also, although not all the way legal there, although certainly they've got more companies that are pushing this. And while it is not investment advice, I will point out the psychedelic space has been doing very well for those who have been putting attention on it.
Cool. So cannabis, psychedelics, all that fun stuff. Josh, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Patrick, go ahead and introduce yourself as well right afterwards, and kind of tell us what your role is in the blockchain space and the cannabis industry, and how you kind of got started where you are right now.
Sure. I'm Josh Lawler. We have a law firm, Zuber Lawler. We're about 40 attorneys. We're in LA, New York, Chicago, Silicon Valley, and now Phoenix as of about 2 months ago. And we're all ex-big firm folks. I kind of grew up in kind of a large mega firm, Skadden Arps, doing mergers and acquisitions in finance, and always been something of a futurist. My partner, Tom Zuber, decided to open the new firm with 2 guys in a kitchen and no clients. He asked me if I'd like to go from Skadden to that environment. I told him he was out of his tree, but I did recommend the first client. That was a $1,000 retainer for a deal done outside of a coffee bean and tea leaf. So you could say we've come some distance, which is kind of nice. After I left Skadden and got to the firm, I picked up intellectual property as a practice area also, and I've always been something of a futurist. So I've really had an eye on many things, but blockchain amongst them, since fairly early on. And for anybody who's looking for trivia, the 2 stupidest words that I've ever said are the words tulip bulbs, which I said to Brock Pierce and Bill Quigley in 2011. We know how that worked out for everybody involved. So in any case, ICO mania hit in 2017. That's squarely in securities law world. And being already aware of blockchain, I started looking at things and largely stayed out of the mix for the ICOs because I was pretty sure people were going to go to jail. I still am questioning that a little bit. But once folks would start looking at things and understanding securities law was involved, we started picking up clients. At the same time, I started trading crypto and reading a lot of white papers. And it turned out that I just have a giant mental itch for the whole topic and do a lot in terms of business modeling and tokenomics and, along with the legal and the regulatory stuff as well, doing a lot of work with NFTs now also. On a parallel track, and don't ask me how this happened, when we started the firm, we have a friend, still a client, who opened 2 of the earliest California dispensaries in Santa Monica and Venice. And at the time, there were no attorneys who were working with any of these guys other than the criminal guys who had taken on the licensing role. So he needed to get some finance work done, just a promissory note. But since we were guys who knew how to do that and we weren't constrained by being in a big firm anymore and all that kind of junk, we started doing some of that basic finance for the dispensary folks, and kind of word got around. And when California went rec legal, yes, Josh is a lawyer to answer buying kick token PM me. When California went legal, we decided we'd like to be on the right side of history, and made some comments about Joseph Kennedy and how that worked out for those guys, and really dived in. And for a while, we were really the only high-end firm who was pushing this stuff at all. And that's changed a little bit, but we're still very involved, and we're really the only ones who can say we've been in the space for 13 or 14 years. For whatever reason, on the psychedelic front, because it's a scheduled substance, a lot of people assume it's pretty much the same animal. It's really not at all. But there are parallels, of course, and because we're involved, we have a lot of that just coming into us. And I've been doing a lot of speaking for the Canadian Stock Exchange about psychedelics in the capital markets and all those types of things. So that's a very long way of saying somehow I ended up being the cannabis psychedelics blockchain guy for law, and it is a lot of fun.
Cool. Nice. Thanks for being here, Patrick.
Well, Josh, it's all very impressive. Let's see if hopefully I can meet some of those standards. So I actually also started off as a corporate lawyer at a big firm called Wilson Sonsini, based here in Palo Alto. And a few years ago, I have this, similar to Josh probably, this intellectual itch, or actually let's call it a extreme adversity to stupidity. So what I mean by that is I had friends in cannabis, they're growing, and they're telling me they can't get bank accounts. And so what I realized was like, well, wait a minute, I know banks that do this. Why aren't they doing this? Or why aren't more banks doing this? And the deeper I went down the rabbit hole, the more I realized that it's not about purely just legalization. It's really about, can we create an environment where the regulators, the bank lawyers, the compliance groups, can everyone get comfortable with the data and an audit trail, fundamentally. And so at Athena Pay, what we did is we created software to work with cannabis companies so that we can build an audit trail, very clearly a very basic use case for blockchain, and keep our overseers very, shall we say, satisfied. Because fundamentally, we just want to make sure we're complying with federal law, FinCEN guidelines, and all the little idiosyncratic issues that every bank has. Because although all banks, I thought when I first came to this industry, all banks were the same. Turns out every bank is different. And every time there's a change of staff, rules change. And so it's very hard for the cannabis industry to stay on top of that. But the good news is that we stay on top of it on behalf of our clients. So what this means is that if we can get the right data set and we can actually show and prove to ourselves and prove to the bank and their lawyers and their regulators that we're not money laundering fundamentally, then we're allowed to bring the cash to the Federal Reserve and bring it in, convert it to electronic money, or receive electronic money on behalf of our clients. And so we've came at this through a hyper-transparent approach, which is, again, a very clear use case for blockchain. I will say that when we first started this, there were a lot of people who were using, for example, cryptocurrency to solve this. And I'll tell you that the way to piss off a regulator very quickly is to combine cannabis and crypto. So we always make it very clear, we're not a crypto firm, we are a blockchain firm, because we are very happy to share the data and show, really, has there been a change in the data? Where the data coming from? How can we audit it very quickly and easily? So what we did, though, is in addition to our technology, we actually did register as a money service business. So because we touch the money, we as a firm also have first level responsibility to make sure, just like a bank does, to not money launder. So we're doing our own suspicious activity reports. We do all the filings. We act and do everything in conjunction with our bank. So at a high level, it's all about compliance. And that's where, again, blockchain is perfect.
So actually, take me more through that data that you collect. Like what kind of data are you actually collecting and presenting to these regulators, lawmakers, and all the important people that you're working with?
So it starts at a high level with financial data. So we want to see how is a cannabis firm generating money, right? Because if there is, so I'll give you an example. There are a lot of folks who have, and Josh is probably familiar with this, they have legacy cash. They have cash that was generated prior to 2018, before recreational cannabis was legalized in California. Well, guess what? That legacy cash needs to stay out of the banking system. It will not be allowed to come in. So since we've been in business, we've been offered over $700 million in cash, which is a lot of money, but money we can't ever touch. So give you a sense. So if someone comes to us and says, oh, we do $1 million a month, right? And suddenly they want to drop off $10 million, something is out of whack. That's a very basic one, right? But we also look at things like the metric data, which is a seed to sale program that California has adopted. And that's really a product tracking mechanism where you can follow physical inventory from the actual planting of the seed all the way to the point where it's been used for oil or some sort of other extract, to the inclusion as part of a product, all the way to the sale to retail level. So we can see all that, and what we do is we create our own data graph to make sure that we're following things properly, and just to make sure that if there are any changes, that we can actually observe those changes. Because what happens is that a lot of times, the people who really want to game the system, I think Josh knows this, what you can do is you can actually change the metric data. There is a way to do it. People don't always know how to do it, but if you're an engineer, you can figure it out. Well, the problem is if you set your metric data to, let's say, 100, right? Maybe 100 kilograms. And later on, you change it to 1,000. At the time that the bank reviews the transaction, they may not know it. They might not know the change. They just see the old input. And then once it's changed, then that actually frees up the cannabis firm, for example, to create more waste, which will allow more cannabis to be sold out the back door, for example, to generate more cash. So it's basically what we're doing is we're collecting and cross-validating financial data with product data at a high level.
Got you. And making that whole entire process more transparent to.
Absolutely.
Okay, got you. Super, super interesting stuff. So I kind of want to talk about more of the product development side of cannabis and even psychedelics, right? Because Patrick, you were talking all these touch points, right? From growing the seed to harvesting the seed to taking out whatever, the leaves and trimming them and et cetera, right? How do you actually ensure product quality and product transparency, right? Because obviously you record every single one of these touch points, right? And whether it be on a private blockchain or a public blockchain, typically private, if I'm not mistaken. Would it be a private blockchain? Okay. How do you ensure that the product isn't actually being tampered with on the other end, right? And because you're actually having humans at the end of the day manage these products, distribute them. So how can you ensure that they're actually not being tampered with?
Right. Look, I'll give you our opinion, but I'd also love to hear Josh's as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're only good for is for the data we receive. So we're looking at the lab tests that go through the system. So as the lab is reviewing, for example, flour, or they're reviewing the gummies, or they're reviewing whatever they are, that's all we can see. And the best that we can do is track the lot numbers as they're going through metric. And so if there's a problem, really that's going to be between the buyer and seller, ultimately be with the distributor probably and the retailer. And there's not a lot that we can do with respect to quality. What we can do really is we're doing the anti-money laundering to make sure that they're not swapping out product and trying to sell something they shouldn't be selling, or selling in a quantity that doesn't make sense. So if there, for example, there are a lot of techniques to what we call invert or divert money, which will essentially allow, a lot of these cannabis producers, as Josh knows, is that they're under extreme financial pressure because of all the taxes. And so there's a huge incentive for them to actually bring in, dark money into the system. So we're really on the forefront of trying to prevent that. So we're really not on the quality assurance side as much. But Josh, I'd love to hear your opinion.
Josh, I see you nodding your head a lot. I kind of want to hear your take on it.
I'm doing a lot of head nodding. Patrick and I have not met before tonight, I don't think, but I really feel like we're very much in mind meld mode here in terms of transparency. And from where I look at it, really following the spirit of the law on, all of these different fronts, because the regulators are in many cases extremely mixed up and in some cases even hopeless. And we're going to have to drag them kicking and screaming into the right way to do things. And the only way to really do that is to be a little bit, Snow White pure in terms of not hurting anybody. So, that's great stuff to hear. I get a very different view process-wise along different spots. So, the question about authenticity of product and supply chain is, a very complicated one with a lot of different answers. On the one hand, I love seed to sale, but what nobody really talks about is where did the seed come from, which cracks me up because they're not supposed to cross state borders, but of course they do. Otherwise, strains couldn't be grown in place to place. And I mention that because one of the biggest problems that the product companies have is trying to get a consistent experience for their product, no matter where you are. So, to draw it out, if you open a can of Coca-Cola anywhere in the world, you're pretty sure you know what you're going to get as far as what that can of Coca-Cola is, what it tastes like, what it looks like, all that other kind of stuff. Hopefully you didn't get a mouse in the bottle, but beyond that, you're pretty sure. On the cannabis front, it's not even close to that. There's kind of very wide divergence in terms of how strong something might be, what the dosage might be, what the terpene mix might be, all those other types of things. So, in addition to, the THC active ingredient, which can't cross borders, there's a lot of attention put on other things that can cross borders, along with packaging, to kind of make sure that there's some level of quality control. Now, against that, in terms of verifying authenticity, and definitely a blockchain use case, is, labeling that is tied to, authenticity on a per unit basis. And somebody mentioned, Ryan Cooper mentioned RFID chips on marijuana packaging. One of our clients is VChain. They've got a great solution for this type of thing. Chroma, who's been working with Ease, has got, another one. And that's going to become pretty much standard pretty quickly, I think. You're not going to actually have any packaged goods that don't have their own unique identifier. Okay, sorry, I'm laughing at the chat with Ryan. Yeah, we like VChain. But you're not going to have any of the stuff that doesn't have an identifier, so that you can verify its authenticity. And the black market angle of it is it's a real threat to that Snow White pure transparency that we were talking about. So low hanging fruit for a blockchain use case. There are a lot of different blockchain use cases in the space.
So kind of take me through more. So what are some of the most popular ones that you see brewing right now? What has failed? What has succeeded? And who's doing it right?
Okay, well, what has failed, and Patrick can certainly attest to this, is payment processing.
There's a litany of them. Yeah. And I'll tell you where we started from, because I think there's a starting point does spit out the right answer. So when people try to use, cryptocurrency, for example.
Paragon.
Oh my God, yes, Paragon. There's a litany of them, right?
Which one? Which one is it?
Paragon. Was there a class action lawsuit against them?
Well, Paragon had the distinction of being one of the first SEC consent decrees that came out. So that's those guys.
Yeah, that smelled bad from the beginning. So look, the issue for any cultivator, for example, right? Just talk about a grower in Humboldt County. What do they want? They want to be able to use the money, right? So if they can't use the money, it's no good to them. So giving them something crypto is just as good as them giving them in gold or whatever. They just can't get it to a bank and exchange it. So just so you guys know, I'll give you a little story about the kind of issue we face. So we get calls every once in a while from Bitcoin ATM companies, and they're asking us, "Hey, can we help them, convert their Bitcoin to fiat?" Right? And the problem is that we can't do the audit trail all the way to the source, and so that same issue applies when we go to, let's say, if we're trying to convert cryptocurrency like Potcoin or Paragon, whoever it is, for a grower. One issue is that the valuation is fluctuating at all times. So what they sold it for is not necessarily when they get it out, because the timing is not instantaneous. Well, if it's instantaneous, you've sort of defeated the purpose of why you need a coin. It only is good for the grower if it's like going up in value, but no one can guarantee that, right? So ultimately, it's about who can off-ramp that back into fiat. Well, the core question about off-ramping that, it's about anti-money laundering. We need to know where it started from. We need to see the entire history of that. And a lot of times, what they have just isn't good enough, in terms of the audit trail of where the money came from, who was the original coin source, who was the original source of that money. And unfortunately, that makes it a lot harder for a participant in the e-commerce system to be able to easily pull that money back into fiat so they can use it for taxes and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to add to that, which I couldn't agree more, but to add to that, one of the things about cannabis is there is a tax every step of the way. You've got a cultivator tax, you've got a manufacturer tax, you've got a distributor tax, you've got all these excise taxes. So, the off-ramp point is a really good one, because literally every single time you've got the product going from one to another, you're going to need to have an off-ramp for your crypto to get it to fiat, so you can pay that particular tax. And that's extremely inconvenient, impractical, whatever you want to call it. And if all it was one time, then the exchanges are now pretty good globally about doing KYC. They weren't always, but there's still some places you can go, some of the DEXs and things like that, where you might be able to exchange some stuff, and you're not going to pass muster for Patrick. And you're probably not going to be able to dodge like chain analysis or somebody of that nature, but you probably could get to fiat if you really, really wanted to. Not that I'm recommending that, not legal advice. But it's just not the world we live in. Each step has a tax. It's just like nobody's going to be able to do it. Even if you can do it technically, you can't really do it.
So how would that look like more on the federal level now? So now we have the MORE Act being kind of reviewed by, the House of Representatives this week, if not today, tomorrow, right? How would that kind of look like? And let's say that gets passed. So a couple questions. If that gets passed, what's like the outcome of that right now?
I don't think it changes what we just discussed at all. For one thing, all these taxes we're talking about are state law taxes, but even beyond that, that act is not going to touch cryptocurrency or make it any different in terms of when you have to file a suspicious activity report. So that I don't think is going to make any real difference. Where I do think it'll make a difference is taking away the demand for cryptocurrency in the first place. Because now, fiat's bankable and the whole thing can run the normal way things normally run, which, and Patrick, I'd be interested in your experience, but from our experience, there's already plenty of financial institutions that have gone down the road and are okay with it. We represent a couple of them. I'm sure they'd rather be nameless at this point. But nobody's blind to the size of the industry and what's developed.
Yeah. So let me go back a moment to address sort of the basic fundamentals of cannabis, because I think at one level, what people have a hard time understanding is that just recently a friend of mine was telling me that she is a manufacturer of cannabis products. She met the distributor and the retailer in the same room, and they exchanged north of $150,000 between the three of them because of the tax issue, right? And it was all in cash. And the reason was because basically 2 out of 3 of them didn't have a legitimate bank account. And she also told me that if she doesn't sit in the room with them, automatically she can write off 10%. And the odds of her getting her money is 50%. So she has to be in the room to get the money.
That's insane.
So we're at a level of the industry is at a level where I think most people have a hard time understanding how far back cannabis is. And so introducing cryptocurrency, blockchain, all this stuff is very tricky for a lot of people in the industry because they're not there yet. They don't understand what all that means and what the benefits are. You got to get them through step by step through the evolution of a proper financial industry. Now, I will say, Josh is probably working with a lot of great companies, and I think the great companies do get access to bank accounts. But as Josh also knows, you've probably seen this, a lot of people are using shall we call it DBAs. They're trying to fool the bank. They're using management companies. They're using all these different things that when a bank will look through this, they'll look through it all. They go to a natural person and they want to see what is actually happening. And if they don't, guess what? And this goes to Ezra's point here, I think, which is that once you're not being transparent with your bank and you're committing some level of bank fraud, you're in a lot of trouble. That's fundamentally what's happening. And what the bank does is rather than do the investigation and realize, oh, this is not a big deal, I get what you're doing, they just boot you out. There's no point with them fighting with the regulator to keep one account. Mm-hmm. Unless they've set up a cannabis program, it's just not worth it to them. Yeah. So we've seen lots of cannabis companies at cannabis banks get booted out because they haven't delivered their quarterly financials in a timely fashion. And so it's like, nope, we can't do the review, you're out. So we are on the service side. So we are really on the, we're trying to work with our cannabis companies to make sure they're always in compliance with us. So therefore they can be, we all can be compliant with the bank and what they need. So yeah, it's really rough on them. But so, ultimately, I would say probably in my world, I think, Josh, maybe you can disagree, but I think 1 out of 10 maybe have a legitimate bank account of the people we've seen.
That's low. It's been a long time since we've been asked to take cash or sequentially numbered money orders, which is nothing we were ever going to do, of course.
Yeah.
You're right that we do have maybe a little bit of a better class of client. We work with a lot of the largest brands in the state, a lot of MSOs, a lot of funds, all that type of stuff. And it certainly wasn't always that way back in the day. But, you know, we have some clients that have had issues with banks also. And I'll tell you, I mean, 2 things that we've seen that are just brutal. One of them with the dark money that Patrick's talking about comes on, you know, an M&A exit because, you know, the target wants to get credit for the fact that their financial, metrics have been whatever they are, top line, bottom line, but their tax return doesn't say that that's what it's been because they can't declare it as taxes. So, you know, you get this really odd situation that I don't think I've seen actually in any other business where, you know, all sides know what really happened. It's, you know, it's not a secret to anybody, but they can't necessarily do anything about it. The money is not suddenly going to get legitimate. You know, you get some very strange earnout kind of scenarios, but, you know, one of the things that we really counsel people is like, you got to be able to pay your taxes. Whatever else you're doing, you have to be able to pay your taxes because if you don't, your future is just, you know, totally whacked.
But how, right? How do you go through that process?
That's the thing. I mean, you know, the funny thing about tax is that, you know, illegal activity generates tax and you have to pay your tax on your illegal activity.
Right.
You know, if you don't have a bank account, you know, I think Patrick would have better ideas than I have. I've heard of people literally driving armored trucks up to deposit. You know, but it has to happen, and you know that might be one of the reasons why our Congress might, you know, get ourselves some banking services, because frankly it makes it a pain in the butt for them to collect money, not to have it. The other thing that we've seen is a lot of people who, in doing the DBA thing or the individual thing, have really screwed themselves from a personal liability standpoint, because, you know, there is bank fraud. Fraud is the F word, you know, that cuts through any limited liability entity thing. And, you know, we've had clients who try to explain to the IRS how, you know, there were several different accounts and none of them counted, and some money disappeared from one of them. Go figure. I mean, it's just, it's a mess. So, you know, yeah, it's a big deal.
Oh, there is no legit way. There is no standard cut way. It's basically going and beating around the bush, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you know, honestly, this is one of the reasons I like the industry, is it leaves a lot of room for creativity on the lawyer front. So we can come up with some harebrained scheme to try to figure out how to legally do something.
Right.
But it's what it is.
Well, you know, also, I think the other side of it too is that when you've got these, you know, these tax payments that are out there, and you've got people who are struggling to pay them, but want to pay them, but then they're also declaring like, really, let's put it this way. So Josh, I'm going to defer to you on this, but I've been told that the 280E, if people don't know what 280E is, it's basically what Josh is referring to. Under the Internal Revenue Code, you're only allowed to deduct the cost of goods sold against revenue for your illegal activity. So that's all, but you can't deduct any other sort of standard deductions. So therefore, when you actually add it all up, I've been told this is roughly a 10% tax just off the top. If you just back into it. Is it worse than 10%? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it depends where you are business wise, but think of yourself if you're a dispensary. Right. Every product you buy is illegal. So, you can't deduct your expenses from any of that. You're basically paying tax on your gross instead of on your net, which is crazy. The further back you go, the cultivation's got a little bit less of an issue. Manufacturing's kind of in the middle. But the other thing that's happened here is there's been some really amazing, legal action in terms of different ways that people try to avoid this by bleeding money out of the licensed company. That in itself is, it's another thing where there's a lot of very fine lines that we're walking because there's no choice.
And my bigger point too is that because of this, we've actually seen a lot of really first-class CFOs from very great firms come and try to enter this business, but because they have to sign a tax return, they don't do it. They quit because they have to either audit their cash every month, which is always somehow they always lose 5%. Someone's walking out with wads of money because they can't control it all the time. And then also you've got these double books. So who's going to put their name on the tax return, right? And so rather than deal with that, they bail. So it's a really tough situation for the cannabis industry. But it is it's the business we're in. Otherwise, why be in it, right? There's got to be a reason.
Yeah, and just to go back on the MORE Act, just because it's one of the most relevant things happening right now. So will that kind of alter that whole entire process? I didn't go in depth into the MORE Act. I feel like, Josh, you have more of a hand around this. So that will kind of alter that whole entire process, right?
Hey, Josh, do you want to summarize for the people on the in the group here, like high level, the MORE Act?
I mean, all right. So high level, the idea here is that it doesn't deschedule, but it's basically an instruction the same way the Cole memo is an instruction that, the federal government is not going to pursue enforcement against banks that operate in the industry in states where it is legal to do so via state law. I mean, that's effectively what you're talking about. And that is a big deal because, what the banks have really been worried about is being brought up on RICO charges. Which absolutely makes sense because it's a criminal enterprise from a federal standpoint. So this thing that was designed for the mob is out there, and RICO is unbelievably nasty to get entangled in. Not to mention the fact that they're all federally chartered and FDIC compliant, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean it changes the whole game. And as I mentioned, our firm's working with a few more mainstream banks. With an idea that as this stuff happens, they're going to want to be in the space because it's an extremely lucrative space. There's a lot of cash. At the same time, I'm sure there are some credit unions and things like that who are currently in the space that are dreading it because they're not going to be able to charge the same kind of fees that they used to. But yeah, it's a major paradigm shift to answer your question, Adam.
Okay.
I'll take a slightly different opinion to judge so we can have a healthy, healthy.
Adam can tell you I am always ready for a healthy.
Yeah. So, our take on this, and this is, with our bank partners and how we sort of sat down, we look at, sort of the fundamentals of it. So let's say, I've been hearing, maybe Josh may know differently, but I've been hearing that the feds are going to want their tax. So no matter what happens, like they're going to either get it through 280E or they're going to do some sort of federal excise tax. Then you add up all the tax at the state, county, city level, right? And now what you got is you've got a massive difference between the fair market value of a fully taxed cannabis product versus the black market. It can be 40 to 50% different. Well, guess what? When you have that kind of tax pressure, then you've got a problem with these cannabis companies who are really struggling to make money and now have a big incentive not to, for example, destroy a product that didn't pass the lab test, right? When a lot goes down, when a lot is rejected, they're required to destroy it and certify that. Well, they're happy to write that letter up, but did they really do it? Or do they leave it on the back porch and someone combined just drop off a bag of money, right, for their leftover product? So we don't know, right? We don't know. The point is that all these banks are nervous about not having the proper compliance procedures in place to review all that. So all the stuff, the MORE Act, the States Act, the Safe Banking Act, all this stuff really, I think, are baby steps, but it's not going to open the door to a ton of banks, but I think a few banks that were on the fence will come into the business. But these banks are still going to be subject to concentration issues, meaning that they're not allowed to have too many high-risk clients, nor have too many deposits that are from high-risk deposits.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my opinion. What do you think, Josh?
So, I mean, I think that's absolutely right at a certain level. But, what do you say about a bank that's dealing with a loan to a private equity group that's purchasing portfolio companies in the space? That's something where the MORE Act actually will make a gigantic difference in a lot of what we see. And again, it's higher level. It's not the dollar that's going to purchase the product at the dispensary, but it is a big deal because it makes a level of capital formation that's not otherwise available possible, which is really what drives the industry in general. So, from that perspective, I think it's going to be a very big difference. In terms of, the question about generally speaking, if something fails a test, the first thing I hear is that they take it to a different lab to test it again.
We've heard that too. Yeah.
They do get different answers. But the folks that, I'm sure somebody's doing that. I don't hear about it from our guys. We tend to work with the larger brands and such, and they're just not going to risk things by playing that kind of a game. So, sure it happens, but not going to focus. I will say we get back to the blockchain use case, where, if you've got the stuff tagged in a way that is very difficult, nothing's impossible, but very difficult to, scramble, then, you have less of an opportunity to leave it on the back porch and show up and have, a lot of money sitting there instead at some point in time. I also think, with respect to the taxes and the black market thing, our firm really spearheaded a move against weed maps that ultimately had them stop listing black market dispensaries. We were literally a day from filing a class action lawsuit against them. And, what you're going to see is a combination of adjustment of expectation by the various taxing authorities to realize that, hey, there's federal, state, county, and local, and they all want a bigger bite than they should have. And then so they'll figure that out. And the other piece is there will be a crackdown on the black market products to take that off the street as far as a competitive, competitor. One thing that happened last year that was very interesting was, the issue with vapes. And there were a lot of products where, it was not a licensed product. In some cases, they were counterfeit products, and you had people dying. And for a moment that, we represent Central Coast Agriculture, they make Raw Gardens, the biggest vape company in the state. And trust me when I say there was a little bit of angst over what was going to happen and whether Gavin Newsom was going to put something down that just made it illegal, period. And, lo and behold, they tested things out and they found it was something to do with the materials used in the delivery mechanisms. And, that had the opposite effect. Now, all of a sudden, the authentic product, which people can say, okay, this is regulated, people are doing this correctly, became more valuable, which, happens when your other choice is possible death. So, it'll work its way through. All this stuff works its way through sooner or later.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that the transition has been from black to gray to white market. And I think that's just gaining more momentum And so it hopefully will become less of a problem, just people wanting to even consider doing things illegally.
I think that's right. And it's one of the best arguments for descheduling. Honestly, you get back to the thing I was mentioning before about consistency of product. And, think about it from the Coca-Cola example. You've got a choice of a few different soft drinks that you can drink. And one of them is, the kind of mystery cola that's, in some kind of mystery can with mystery labeling. And then you've got, a Coca-Cola next to it. And, how cheap does that mystery thing have to be before you're willing to go after that on a relative basis? I mean, now add to the fact that it's a psychoactive substance, and now how cheap does it have to be? I just think this stuff will get worked out of the system. And one of the things about descheduling is as soon as that happens, you're going to see, mainstream large companies, Nestle will probably jump in. We don't represent Nestle, and I don't know that, so don't hold that against me. But I could see it easily. The tobacco companies certainly are chomping at the bit, and most of them move heavily into alcohol in the first place. Obviously, Constellation did their deal with Canopy Growth, so that's sitting there waiting to happen. It just changes the entire game so much.
Well, let me ask you this. So I've read an article, again, not saying it's the truth, but what I heard is that if Biden wants to schedule, he might take it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, and then it'll fall under the regime of the FDA. So Josh, do you have any thoughts on that? Like what that means? Because I think it's not the scheduling where you can buy it off the rack at Safeway, right? For the local grocer, but being under FDA mandate changes the food and beverage piece of it quite a bit in terms of the consumption. If it's treated like tobacco products, all sorts of. It's a new sense of uncertainty for the industry. But I'm wondering what you think, because I don't know what to think. I'm just going, oh my God, like what does that mean?
I'm going to start with shameless plug because that was a beautiful lead-in for me. We have a PhD pharmacologist lawyer in our New York office named Dr. Jayashri Mitra, who specializes in FDA applications along with patent litigation for pharmaceutical companies. And we've been kind of waiting for the FDA to jump in for a year and a half now, because we think it's definitely going that way, especially with CBD products off hemp right now, and getting grass that's generally recognized as safe designations, and also the ability to actually put medical claims on your labeling. And for anybody who is watching, the FDA sent like 15 warning letters out last year on one day to a bunch of CBD product companies that were putting, makes you sleep better, whatever it was, different stuff, anti-inflammatory, can't say that. So it's definitely going to go there. In terms of, whether that's going to be required of everything, I'm not sure. You've got a funny situation in that, CBD is already on the market in a non-regulated way. And it's already been declared not a drug. And that puts the FDA in a very funny situation. And we're not sure exactly how they're gonna resolve that. But what I can say we're looking at as a virtual certainty is that Safeway and CVS and Walgreens and Costco, et cetera, and so forth, are not going to put stuff on the shelves that isn't FDA approved. They're just not going to put stuff up without a GRAS designation. There's no way. We see that happening. It's too much risk and too much bad publicity. And besides that, they're going to probably come up with their own generic brands of stuff, which will have a GRAS designation, and that's what you're going to be up
with. Trader Joe's branded spliff, joint, whatever it may be.
$2
Yeah, exactly. Super interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to see how this plays out. I want to kind of jump into the QA section. This one comes from Pierre. He's in Ottawa, Canada. He says, I live 5 minutes from Canopy Growth and Hexo. Question, what has investments by big companies, Constellation into Canopy, for instance, done to accelerate blockchain adoption in the cannabis space?
Josh, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
I have no idea.
As far as I know, not a damn thing. I know nothing specific on that. the Canopy deal I absolutely love because they've got a global alcohol distribution chain, and as soon as things are ready for it, they're going to be able to launch product through that, extremely fast. Yeah, from a blockchain perspective, don't know. With Hexo, I expect absolutely nothing, just because that company has had other things to keep its eyes on and is not nearly as cash rich. But I couldn't say for Canopy.
Okay. Next question comes from Chad Martin. Are there recruiters working with companies in this blockchain and cannabis space? They all focused. I'm not too sure what recruiters mean. Are you guys picking up on that?
I mean, as I guess people looking for a job.
I would expect.
Is it from a job perspective?
Well,
are you guys hiring? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, there are recruiters in both spaces. I mean, that's certain.
Yeah, I think from what we're seeing, I mean, at least the blockchain side, there just doesn't seem to be. I mean, there are a few companies that are software based that are doing something related to blockchain and cannabis, but we're not talking about thousands of job openings. They're like 10. A recruiter's really not going to get that involved. Yeah. I think on that side of it. And by the way, I would also argue that cannabis and blockchain, like, we're not on the cutting edge. We're not trying to be on the cutting edge. We're trying to be a very solid use case and be very easy for the regulators to understand what we're doing, so they know that our audit trail is very clean and very easy to audit, right? So they don't need to hire a forensic accountant to come see our books. That's really the goal. And so I think the true folks who are in blockchain engineering, right, they're looking to push the edge, right? That's not, I think, what's needed for the cannabis industry right now. We're already pushing the edge, right? Because we're doing a lot of stuff that is very, can be slammed down pretty hard. I know before we entered the business, we talked to a lot of friends, and a couple got leaned on pretty hard by the U.S. attorney, right? And they were told, you better shut down or you will go to jail. And they made it very clear, and they weren't joking. So it is a very, I think the big banks are protected, right? They've got lots of lawyers and working with regulators. But anyone who's trying to innovate in the space has to be very careful about what lines they're willing to go up against, because my recommendation is don't get too close to the edge.
Yeah, I think that's particularly true in payments. Which is where Patrick is. I think that supply chain, as we were talking about before, for example, has got a little bit more room for people to wiggle, to be innovative, because again, that becomes about accuracy and transparency, and blockchain is a spectacular technology, and I'm happy to chat about that for 5 days if anybody wants to listen to me. There's more space, but payments are sensitive, and it goes back to what Patrick was saying at the beginning. It's just there's so much fear about money laundering, so much fear about illegal activity, and the regulators are kind of spooked from both directions, from both the blockchain direction and a cannabis direction.
Yeah, jumping into the COVID side of things now. How has COVID impacted the cannabis space, psychedelics space, and also your own individual businesses?
I'm going to go first in this one, Josh, if you like. We're seeing actually a lot of folks making more money than they did last year. They're actually doing really well. And what we're also seeing, though, is that through unfortunately, some of the riots and those things like that, people, they were robbed, and it was a lot of chaos, and they lost a lot of money. So there's a big push to try to electronify, if you will, make electronic their money in some way. And that's where we're stepping in and helping. But, when we look at some of our initiatives, I'll tell you, we're actually deeply involved in the social equity side. So these are folks from the, Black and brown communities who are not able to even get a license. But once they do, they get a special one under social equity for the underrepresented communities. And so what we realize is that distributors have a hard time actually paying them because they can't get bank accounts. So we're really trying to help make that process more smooth, because the faster that they can get their money, the faster they can spend it and turn it over to make more product. So anyway, so we're seeing a lot of increase in revenue from our clients. We're also seeing more risks as well.
Okay, Josh.
I'm not sure that what I'm seeing is any different than what the rest of the country is seeing in a lot of different aspects of things. COVID hasn't slowed our practice down whatsoever. If anything, we're more efficient than we were before because we've been forced to be. And, a lot of stuff we thought we needed, we didn't actually need, it turns out. There's almost a level of COVID guilt, to be honest, because, we shouldn't be having it as well as we have it, quite honestly. As far as the cannabis industry goes, I think maybe it's affecting some of the cultivators in the sense that a lot of their employees are, very susceptible because they tend to congregate, if you will. Not as much in cannabis, but other agriculture, the migrant farm workers are an especially vulnerable population based on the way they travel and the way they tend to be sheltered, housing wise sheltered, not metaphorically speaking. So that's going to have some level of an effect. Obviously, dispensaries delivery is very big now. It's good time to be ease. But the dispensaries are still moving, things are still going, products are still developing. The MSOs are still applying for licenses. 3 states just went, legal as far as recreational goes. Another shameless plug, we're helping to write the statutes in Arizona for that. That's all moving. The momentum behind the cannabis industry at this point is not stopping anytime soon. It's not going to have one of these pauses for adoption the way virtual reality and blockchain has in the disillusionment phase. No, that's done. Companies are moving, and even if they're not making money, they're moving to gain market share. And there's a serious promise that they will, get money very quickly out of that. And the stock market's going nuts again, all that kind of good stuff. So COVID hasn't really stood in the way of that. From the blockchain perspective, DeFi's rocking out, for whatever you want to call DeFi. It's almost like saying that math is rocking out. It's such a variable term, but that's very hot. I think that there is a lot lost in terms of not being able to have the in-person events in the crypto world that maybe isn't hitting the cannabis world quite as hard. From that perspective, things I think are a little bit slower than they have been. NFTs will be interesting. We're focusing on those quite a bit. And NFTs, I think, have an ability to be a real bridge to the mainstream population. We still have to figure out the fiat crypto on-off ramp issue. And the user experiences are still abysmal for anybody who's not in the space. Go to OpenSea, try to figure out how Wax works. And I love Bill Quigley, I really do, but it's hard. But that said, NFTs are great because they're not crypto and they're going to appeal to major companies that have major intellectual property. And period, end of story. That will push it through as a use case.
Love it. Actually, next week's topic, NFTs, rareables, and whatnot. So we're gonna have a lot of cool people on there for next week. But anyways, that's all the time we have for today. Josh, Patrick, you guys killed it. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being here and spending an evening with us on Blockchain and Booze. Before I let you guys go, why don't you go ahead and tell us where we can find you, your companies, and kind of just learn more about what you're working on.
Josh, why don't you go first? Have the honor.
Sure. So I am few places, but Zuber Lawler is our firm. You can get me at jlawler@zuberlawler.com. Very creative, I know. I am occasionally on Twitter as jlawlercal and also available on LinkedIn. I'm happy to discuss any of these items with anybody who's within the space, certainly.
Cool.
Great. And first of all, Adam, thanks for having us. This is a great conversation. You guys can find me. Our website is athena-pay.com. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Athena Pay. And just email's probably the easiest way to get to me is patrick@athena-pay.com. And happy to chat more.
Cool, guys. And before we break off, the most exciting part for me now is the whole networking session that happens. And in just a couple seconds, I'm going to end this presentation mode, and we're all going to be distributed to these colorful tables where we'll be able to bounce from seat to seat and meet people from everywhere around the world that are watching and joining us live right now. But in order to do so, everybody that's watching, make sure you have your mics on, make sure you have your cameras on. Otherwise, you're going to be incredibly confused. Okay, so mics on, cameras on. We'll see you next week when we discuss NFTs. Patrick and Josh, thank you so much. And that's all we have for today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure.
Yeah.